The phone buzzed against my kitchen counter as I stirred pasta sauce, the caller ID showing Dad's number. I almost let it go to voicemail since we hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, but something made me answer. His voice came through shaky and desperate, nothing like the calm, measured tone I remembered from childhood. "Polly, what did you do? Why did you stop paying our mortgage?" The accusation hit me like ice water. I set down my wooden spoon, processing his words carefully. 3 weeks ago, Mom screamed at me to get out and never come back, so I did exactly that. The silence stretched between us, heavy with realization. My parents had assumed their financial safety net would remain intact despite banishing me from their lives. They were about to discover that actions carry consequences, and theirs were more devastating than they ever imagined. 3 weeks earlier, I had driven through the familiar streets of Westerville, Ohio, windows down despite the October chill. Sunday dinner at my childhood home had become routine over the past 2 years, ever since Dad's construction business collapsed and left my parents scrambling to keep their 4-bedroom colonial afloat. The house still looked picture-perfect from the outside, with Mom's carefully tended rose bushes lining the front walkway and Dad's vintage Chevy gleaming in the driveway. What my parents didn't realize was that their perfect facade existed because I had been secretly paying their mortgage for 24 months. Every month, $1,500 disappeared from my checking account into theirs money that should have been building my own future. Instead, I lived in a cramped studio apartment above a bakery, sleeping on a futon and eating ramen, while they maintained their comfortable lifestyle. I knocked on the familiar oak door painted the same forest green since my high school graduation. Mom answered wearing her favorite burgundy sweater hair perfectly styled, despite claiming she never left the house anymore. She hugged me briefly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Polly, sweetheart, come in. Your father's carving the roast." The dining room table was set with her good china, the same floral pattern that had graced our Sunday meals for decades. Dad emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of beef, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his smile genuine. At 58, he looked older than his years, the stress of financial failure having carved deep lines around his eyes. "There's my girl. How was the drive over?" "Not bad. Traffic was light." I settled into my usual chair, the one that had been mine since childhood-worn cushion molded to accommodate countless family dinners. We made small talk while passing dishes of mashed potatoes, green beans, and Yorkshire pudding. Mom asked about my job at the accounting firm, and I shared news about a recent promotion that would mean a modest salary increase. Dad inquired about my car's strange engine noise, offering to take a look after dinner. The conversation flowed smoothly until I made what seemed like an innocent suggestion. "You know, I was thinking you two might want to consider downsizing. The housing market is still strong, and you could probably get a good price for this place. Maybe find a nice 2-bedroom condo that would be easier to maintain." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Mom's fork clattered against her plate, and she fixed me with a stare that could freeze summer. "Excuse me, did you just suggest we sell our home?" "I just meant that since money has been tight, a smaller place might make things easier. You'd have lower utilities, less maintenance, maybe even some money left over to enjoy retirement." "This is our home, Polly. The home where you grew up. The home where your father and I planned to spend our golden years. How dare you suggest we abandon it?" I could feel the familiar knot forming in my stomach, the same sensation I'd experienced countless times when trying to have practical conversations with my parents about their finances. They lived in complete denial about their situation, somehow believing everything would magically work out without any difficult decisions. "Mom, I'm not trying to upset you. I just thought it might relieve some stress if your expenses were more manageable." Manageable. Her voice rose an octave. "Our expenses are perfectly manageable, thank you very much. We've been taking care of ourselves just fine for 32 years of marriage, without our daughter telling us how to live." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair but remained silent. This was his pattern whenever Mom's temper flared retreat into passive observation, while she dominated the conversation through sheer force of emotion. "I know you can take care of yourselves," I said carefully. "I just worry sometimes." Well, stop worrying. We're adults, and we don't need a 28-year-old telling us what to do with our property. I took a deep breath, knowing I was about to cross a line, but feeling compelled to be honest for once. Actually, I've been thinking about looking for my own place, a real apartment, maybe even a house eventually. I've been saving up, and I think it's time I invested in my own future. The explosion that followed caught me completely off guard, even though I should have anticipated it. Mom's face flushed crimson, her hands shaking as she pointed an accusatory finger across the table. Saving up, investing in your future. What about this family? What about everything we've sacrificed for you over the years? We put you through college, gave you a foundation to build your life on, and now you want to abandon us the moment things get a little challenging. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm just saying it might be time for me to focus on building my own life. Your own life? She laughed bitterly. This is your life, Polly. This family is your life, but apparently we're not good enough for you anymore. You're too successful, too important to care about the parents who raised you. The accusations kept coming, each one more hurtful than the last. I sat there taking the verbal assault, watching Dad's face grow more uncomfortable, but knowing he wouldn't intervene. This was the dynamic I'd grown up with: Mom's explosive emotions and Dad's passive enabling. I think you're being unfair, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Unfair, unfair. She stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. You know what's unfair? Having a daughter who's so selfish and ungrateful that she'd rather spend her money on herself than help her family in their time of need. The irony of her statement hit me like a physical blow. If she only knew how much of my money had been flowing into their household for the past 2 years, she might understand just how wrong she was. But I had never told them about the mortgage payments, the utility assistance, or the countless other ways I'd been propping up their lifestyle. You've always been this way, Polly, always thinking about yourself first. Even as a child, you were calculating and selfish. Now you're showing your true colors, ready to watch your parents lose everything while you live it up in some fancy apartment. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. These accusations were so far from the truth that they felt surreal, like being blamed for a crime I didn't commit by the very people I'd been trying to protect. I love you both, I managed to say. I just think I need to start building my own life. Your own life. Mom's voice reached a crescendo that echoed off the dining room walls. Well then, go build it somewhere else. Get out of my house and never come back. We don't need your guilt trips and judgment. We managed perfectly well before you started interfering, and we'll manage perfectly well without you. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Dad's mouth fell open, clearly shocked by the severity of his wife's ultimatum. But still, he said nothing to defend me or call for reason. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. The little girl inside me wanted to apologize, to take back everything I'd said and beg for forgiveness. But the adult I'd become recognized this moment as a crossroads that would define the rest of our relationship. If that's what you want, I'll respect your wishes. I walked to the coat closet near the front door, retrieved my jacket, and picked up my purse from the entry table. Neither parent followed me or attempted to soften the harsh words that had been spoken. The front door closed behind me with a quiet click that seemed to echo through my chest. As I drove away from the house where I'd grown up, where I'd celebrated birthdays and Christmases and graduations, I made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted me out of their lives, then I would truly be out. All the way out, including the financial support they didn't even know they were receiving. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood as I sat in my cubicle staring at my computer screen. The first order of business was a phone call to First National Bank, where I'd set up the automatic transfer that had been keeping my parents afloat for the past 24 months. Good morning, this is Jennifer. How can I help you today? I need to cancel an automatic monthly transfer from my checking account. The process took less than 10 minutes. A few clicks on their computer system, and the financial lifeline I'd been providing disappeared as if it had never existed. I also canceled the separate transfers that covered their electric bill and property taxes, money my parents assumed came from Dad's sporadic freelance work. For the first time in 2 years, my entire paycheck would stay in my possession. The feeling was both liberating and terrifying. I'd grown so accustomed to living on a shoestring budget that having extra money felt almost foreign. Days passed without any communication from Westerville. I'd expected at least a text message from Dad, maybe an apology or an attempt to smooth things over, but my phone remained stubbornly silent. Apparently, they were taking Mom's ultimatum seriously and had decided they were better off without me. The silence gave me space to think clearly about my living situation for the first time in years. I started browsing apartment listings online, amazed at what I could afford with my full salary. A real one-bedroom with a kitchen that wasn't just a hot plate and mini fridge suddenly seemed possible. Wednesday evening brought an unexpected phone call from my cousin Sarah Mom's sister's daughter, who lived 2 towns over. "Hey, Polly, I just wanted to check on you. Aunt Sharon mentioned at church that you decided to go no contact with the family. She seemed pretty upset about it." I nearly dropped my phone. She said what? That you'd cut off communication with them. She was asking for prayers because she doesn't understand why you're going through this phase. She seemed really hurt and confused. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. In Mom's version of events, I had arbitrarily decided to abandon my loving parents without cause. There was no mention of the explosive argument, the cruel accusations, or her own harsh words demanding that I leave and never return. "Sarah, can I ask what exactly she told people?" "Just that you've been distant lately and now you're not returning their calls or texts. She's worried about you, thinks maybe you're going through some kind of crisis. She mentioned that you've been talking about moving away and focusing on your own life instead of family." Every word was technically true, but stripped of all context to paint me as the villain. My parents weren't just maintaining their silence, they were actively rewriting history to cast themselves as the injured parties. "I see. Well, there's more to the story than that." "Do you want to talk about it?" Aunt Sharon seemed really concerned, and honestly, it doesn't sound like you to just cut them off for no reason. I found myself in an impossible position. Explaining the truth would require me to reveal intimate details about my parents' financial struggles and the support I'd been providing. It would also expose Mom's explosive temper and cruel words, which would inevitably get back to the extended family and cause even more drama. "It's complicated, Sarah. Let's just say we had a disagreement about some important issues and they made it clear they didn't want me around anymore." "But they do want you around. Aunt Sharon was practically in tears talking about how much she misses you." The gaslighting was so complete that even my cousin, who knew my parents well, couldn't imagine any scenario where they might be at fault. In the family mythology, I was the successful daughter who owed everything to her loving parents' support and sacrifice. After the call ended, I sat on my futon staring at the wall of my tiny studio apartment. The place suddenly felt less like a temporary arrangement and more like a prison I'd built for myself through years of misguided loyalty. Thursday morning, I called a real estate agent. By Saturday, I was walking through a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in a converted Victorian house just 15 minutes from my office. The unit featured hardwood floors, a real kitchen with full-size appliances, and a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. The rent was $800 more than my current place, but still well within my budget now that I wasn't supporting 2 households. "I'll take it," I told the agent without hesitation. The application process was surprisingly smooth. My credit score had actually improved over the past 2 years despite my tight budget, probably because I'd been so careful about managing expenses. Within 48 hours, I had approval and keys to a place that felt like a real home. Moving day arrived the following weekend. I didn't own much furniture, having lived so sparingly for so long, but every item I carried up the stairs to my new apartment felt symbolic of a new beginning. For the first time since college, I had space to breathe and room to imagine a future that belonged entirely to me. My parents' silence continued. 2 weeks had passed since the dinner confrontation, and they seemed content to let me remain cut off from their lives. I'd started to believe that maybe Mom really had meant what she said about not needing me anymore. That illusion was about to be shattered in the most dramatic way possible. The call came on a Tuesday evening while I was painting my new bedroom walls a warm shade of sage green. I'd been in my apartment for exactly 1 week and was finally starting to feel settled. The phone rang from across the room where I'd left it on the kitchen counter, and Dad's name appeared on the screen. My heart jumped despite everything that had happened. Maybe this was the apology I'd been waiting for, or at least an attempt to rebuild our relationship. I set down my paintbrush and hurried to answer before it went to voicemail. "Hello, Dad. Polly." His voice sounded strained and shaky, nothing like the confident tone I remembered from childhood. "We need to talk. Now." "Okay, what's going on?" "What's going on is that you apparently stopped paying our mortgage without telling us, and now we're facing foreclosure. I need you to explain to me what the hell you think you're doing." The accusatory tone caught me off guard, especially coming from the parent I'd always considered more reasonable. There was no greeting, no acknowledgement of the 3 weeks of silence, just immediate blame and demands. "I stopped making the payments because Mom told me to get out and never come back." "That has nothing to do with the mortgage, Polly. You can't just stop paying our bills because you're angry about some family argument." The casual dismissal of what had happened as some family argument made my blood pressure spike. But his words also revealed something important. Mom and Dad genuinely didn't understand that I had been the source of their mortgage payments. "Dad, can I ask you something? Where did you think the money for your mortgage was coming from?" "What kind of question is that it comes from our account, same as always?" "And where does the money in your account come from?" There was a long pause, and I could almost hear him thinking through the math for the first time in 2 years. "From my freelance work and your mother's job at the department store." "Dad, you make maybe $600 a month doing odd construction jobs when you can find them. Mom makes $11 an hour working part-time retail. Your mortgage payment alone is $1,400, not counting insurance and property taxes." Another silence, this one heavier and more uncomfortable. "There must be money left over from the business. I set up automatic payments years ago." "The business that went bankrupt 2 years ago, Dad. Where do you really think $1,500 appears in your account every month like clockwork?" I assumed." His voice trailed off as the reality started to sink in. "Polly, are you telling me you've been paying our mortgage for 24 months, along with your property taxes, homeowner's insurance, and about $300 a month toward utilities, every month without fail, whether I could afford it or not?" The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you never asked. You never questioned where the money came from or wondered how you were managing to keep the house on your actual income. You just accepted it as if you deserved it. But the foreclosure notice, they want the full amount by Friday or they start legal proceedings." "How much?" 3 payments plus penalties and fees, just over $5,000. The number hit me like a punch to the stomach. In 3 weeks, my absence had already created a crisis that would be expensive to resolve. But more than that, it revealed just how precarious their situation really was. "Dad, you need to understand something. When Mom told me to get out and never come back, I took her at her word. I stopped all financial support because I'm no longer part of the family. You can't have it both ways." "She didn't mean it like that. Your mother was just upset. She meant it enough to let 3 weeks go by without any contact. She meant it enough to tell our relatives that I chose to cut you off for no reason. She meant it enough to rewrite history so she's the victim instead of taking responsibility for what she said." "Polly, please, we can work this out. Your mother will apologize if that's what you need to hear." "This isn't about an apology anymore, Dad. This is about the fact that you both took my support for granted while treating me like garbage whenever I tried to have honest conversations about your situation." "We never treated you like garbage." You sat there silent while Mom called me selfish and ungrateful for suggesting you might need to downsize. You said nothing while she accused me of abandoning the family when I mentioned wanting to buy my own place. You didn't defend me once during that entire horrible dinner. I should have said something. Yes, you should have, but instead you let her throw me out of the house and then spent 3 weeks in silence before calling to demand that I fix your financial crisis. So you're just going to let us lose the house? The question hung in the air, heavy with decades of family obligation and guilt. This was the moment I'd been dreading, but also the moment I knew would eventually come. I could cave in, restart the payments, and go back to being their financial safety net while accepting whatever emotional abuse they dished out. Or I could hold firm and force them to face the reality of their choices. I'm going to let you handle your own responsibilities just like any other adults, the same way I've been handling mine since I graduated college. Polly, please, think about what you're saying. I am thinking about it, Dad. I'm thinking about how I've been living in a studio apartment and eating ramen noodles while you've been living in a 4-bedroom house eating Sunday roast. I'm thinking about how I've put my entire life on hold to support parents who couldn't even be bothered to thank me or acknowledge what I was doing. We didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. The conversation ended shortly after that with Dad promising to call back once he'd had time to think and talk to Mom. But I already knew how that conversation would go. They'd look for someone else to blame, some way to make this crisis my fault instead of the natural consequence of their own actions and words. As I returned to painting my bedroom walls, I realized I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time since college, my financial future belonged entirely to me. Whatever happened to my parents' house, it would be the result of their own choices and their own efforts to solve it. The phone rang again an hour later, but this time I let it go to voicemail. Within 24 hours of Dad's panicked phone call, my phone became a battlefield of guilt manipulation and family pressure. It started with a text from Uncle Dave, Dad's younger brother, who lived across town from my parents. Polly, your dad called asking for help with the mortgage. What's going on over there? Before I could even formulate a response, my phone buzzed with another message, this time from Aunt Linda, Mom's older sister. Sweetheart, I just got off the phone with your mother. She's beside herself with worry about this situation with the house. Can you call me when you get a chance? The messages kept coming throughout the day. Cousin Michael, who worked in real estate, sent a long text about market conditions and refinancing options. Grandma Patterson, Mom's mother, left a voicemail asking me to call her back about this terrible misunderstanding that was tearing the family apart. By evening, I realized my parents had launched a full-scale family mobilization campaign, reaching out to every relative who might have money or influence to pressure me into resuming my financial support. The strategy was transparent but effective, surrounding me with voices of concern and disappointment. I decided to start with Uncle Dave, who had always been the most straightforward member of the family. He answered on the second ring. Polly, thank God you called. Your dad sounded terrible on the phone. He said something about the mortgage company threatening foreclosure. That's right, they're 3 payments behind. But I don't understand. Robert told me you'd been helping with expenses, but he made it sound like you just suddenly stopped without warning. Did he mention the part where Mom told me to get out and never come back? There was a pause. He said you'd had some kind of argument about the house. Uncle Dave, she screamed at me that I was selfish and ungrateful, then ordered me out of their lives permanently. So I respected her wishes and stopped all financial support. All financial support, Polly? How much were you giving them? $1,500 a month for the mortgage plus property taxes, insurance, and utility assistance. About $2,000 total. The whistle he let out was long and low. Jesus Christ, kid. No wonder you've been living like a college student all this time. You knew about my living situation. I saw that tiny apartment when I helped you move your computer desk last year. I wondered how someone with a good job was living so small, but I figured you were just being careful with money. I was being careful to make sure my parents didn't lose their house. And they didn't know this was coming from you. Dad claims he thought it was automatic from his old business account. Mom was too busy accusing me of selfishness to ask any practical questions about household finances. Uncle Dave was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Polly, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. What? I've been paying their car insurance for 8 months, $320 every 6 months. Robert told me it was temporary just until he got back on his feet. My stomach dropped. You've been helping them too. Yeah, and now I'm wondering who else is floating them money they don't know about. The full scope of my parents' deception was starting to become clear. They hadn't just been accepting my secret support, they'd been cultivating multiple sources of financial assistance while maintaining the illusion of independence. Uncle Dave, when you talked to Dad today, did he ask you for money? $5,000 to catch up the mortgage payments. I told him I'd think about it, but honestly, I don't have that kind of cash lying around. After that conversation ended, I steeled myself for the next call. Aunt Linda answered before the first ring finished. Polly, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called. Your mother is just devastated by this whole situation. What exactly did she tell you happened? She said you two had a disagreement about something, and now you're refusing to help with the house payments. She's worried sick that they're going to lose their home over some family spat. The sanitized version of events was maddening, but I forced myself to stay calm. Aunt Linda did Mom mention what she said to me during this disagreement. She said emotions got heated and things were said that neither of you meant. Things like, get out and never come back. Oh, honey, you know how your mother gets when she's stressed. She doesn't mean half of what comes out of her mouth when she's upset. So I should ignore what people say when they're angry and just continue supporting them financially. Well, when it's family... Aunt Linda, can I ask you something? Have my parents ever asked you for financial help? The pause was telling. Why do you ask? Because I'm starting to realize I'm not the only one who's been supporting them. Well, there have been a few occasions when Sharon needed help with medical bills or Christmas presents for the grandkids. Nothing major. How much and for how long? Polly, I don't think we need to get into specific numbers. Actually, I think we do. Because if they've been collecting money from multiple family members while claiming to be independent, that's a bigger problem than one missed mortgage payment. The silence stretched until Aunt Linda finally admitted she'd been sending $300 every few months for various emergencies over the past year and a half. She'd also paid for Mom's prescription medications twice and bought Christmas gifts for the family gathering because Sharon mentioned money was tight. By the end of the evening, I'd spoken with 5 different relatives and discovered a web of financial support that was staggering in its scope. Cousin Michael had been paying their internet and cable bills. Grandma Patterson had covered property tax shortfalls twice. Uncle Dave was handling car insurance. Aunt Linda was managing medical expenses and holiday costs. All of this support was being provided secretly with each relative believing they were the only ones helping and that their assistance was temporary. Meanwhile, I'd been covering the largest expense of all while living like a broke college student. The manipulation was breathtaking. My parents had created a system where multiple family members were supporting their lifestyle while they maintained the fiction of financial independence. When one source of support dried up, they'd simply activate the family pressure network to find replacement funding. The final call of the evening came from Grandma Patterson, and it was the most difficult one to navigate. Polly, dear, I've been thinking about this situation all day, and I just can't understand why you're being so hard-hearted. Grandma, what exactly do you think is happening? Your parents made a mistake, said some things they didn't mean, and now you're punishing them by threatening their home. That doesn't sound like the granddaughter I raised. The emotional manipulation was expertly crafted, designed to make me feel like a cruel child, rather than an adult setting reasonable boundaries. Grandma, they told me to leave and never come back. I'm just respecting their wishes. Oh, sweetheart, you know your mother doesn't mean those things. She's been crying for 3 weeks, wondering why you won't return her calls. She hasn't called me once. Well, she's probably too proud to reach out after what was said. You know how she is. Yes, I do know how she is, and that's exactly why I'm not rushing back to fix this. Polly, this family has always taken care of each other. We don't abandon people when they need us most. Grandma, I've been taking care of them for 2 years. I've given them over $40,000 of my own money while living in poverty myself. How is that abandoning them? 40,000. Polly, where did you get that kind of money? From working 60-hour weeks and living on ramen noodles so they could keep their house. The conversation with Grandma ended with her promising to pray for wisdom and asking me to search my heart for forgiveness. By the time I hung up, I felt emotionally drained, but also more resolved than ever. My family's response to this crisis revealed everything I needed to know about how they viewed my role in their lives. I wasn't a daughter or granddaughter with my own needs and dreams. I was a resource to be managed and mobilized when necessary, a bank account with emotions that needed to be controlled through guilt and pressure. As I prepared for bed in my beautiful new apartment, I realized that letting them lose the house might be the kindest thing I could do for everyone involved. Sometimes people needed to face the full consequences of their choices before they could learn to make better ones. Friday afternoon brought a phone call I'd been expecting but dreading. Grandma Patterson's voice carried the weight of family authority and barely contained disappointment. Polly, dear, we're having a family meeting tomorrow at my house, 2 o'clock sharp. Your parents need our support right now, and this whole situation needs to be resolved before it goes any further. Grandma, I don't think that's a good idea. It's not a request, sweetheart. This family doesn't abandon each other in times of crisis, and we're not starting now. Everyone will be there, and we expect you to be there too. The phone call ended before I could protest further. Within an hour, I'd received similar messages from Uncle Dave, Aunt Linda, and Cousin Michael. The family had circled the wagons, and I was being summoned to account for my actions before the tribal council. Saturday afternoon found me standing on Grandma's front porch, looking at the familiar yellow house where so many family gatherings had taken place over the years. Through the living room window, I could see multiple cars in the driveway and shadows moving around inside. This wasn't going to be a casual conversation. I'd come prepared for battle. In my purse was my phone with a specific audio file ready to play if necessary. I'd also printed out bank statements showing the 2 years of payments I'd made highlighted in yellow for easy reading. If this family wanted the truth, they were going to get all of it. Grandma answered the door wearing her best church dress and the stern expression she reserved for serious family business. The living room was arranged like a courtroom with my parents sitting on the couch, facing a semicircle of relatives in various chairs dragged in from other rooms. Mom looked smaller than I remembered, her face puffy from crying, and her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. Dad sat beside her with his shoulders hunched, staring at his hands clasped in his lap. Both of them looked up when I entered, but neither spoke or smiled. Polly, take a seat. Grandma gestured to a wooden chair that had been placed directly across from the couch, clearly positioned as the defendant's seat in this family tribunal. I remained standing. Before we start, I need everyone to understand that I'm here by choice, not because anyone has the authority to summon me to account for my decisions. Aunt Linda shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Honey, we're just trying to help work through this misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? Mom told me to get out and never come back, so I did. I stopped paying their bills because I'm no longer welcome in their lives. There's nothing complicated about that. But surely you didn't mean to put their home at risk over a family argument, Uncle Dave said. I didn't put anything at risk. They chose to spend 3 weeks in silence instead of apologizing or trying to work things out. They chose to tell the family that I abandoned them for no reason instead of taking responsibility for what actually happened. Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion. Polly, I never meant for things to go this far. I was upset and I said things I shouldn't have said. What things, Mom? Tell everyone exactly what you said to me. She looked around the room nervously, clearly hoping someone would rescue her from having to repeat her harsh words. I told you that maybe you should leave if you were going to keep criticizing our living situation. The sanitized version was so far from reality that it took my breath away. Even now, facing potential homelessness, she couldn't be honest about her own behavior. Is that really what you said? Just that maybe I should leave? Well, emotions were running high. Mom, tell them what you actually said, or I will. I may have been more forceful than necessary. You screamed at me that I was selfish and ungrateful. You accused me of abandoning the family. You told me to get out of your house and never come back. You said you managed perfectly well before I started interfering, and you'd manage perfectly well without me. The room fell silent. Several relatives looked shocked by the severity of what had actually been said. But instead of backing down or showing remorse, Mom's defensive instincts kicked in. You had no right to record private family conversations. The admission hung in the air like a confession. She just confirmed that my account was accurate while simultaneously trying to make me the villain for documenting her behavior. Actually, I did record it because I knew you'd try to rewrite history later. Would everyone like to hear exactly what was said? I pulled out my phone and pressed play before anyone could object. Mom's voice filled the living room, venomous and cruel, screaming accusations and ultimatums that sounded even worse in the quiet space of Grandma's house. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Uncle Dave was staring at his sister-in-law with undisguised shock. Aunt Linda had her hand over her mouth. Cousin Michael was shaking his head slowly. But Mom wasn't finished defending herself. I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. But that doesn't give Polly the right to destroy our family by withholding financial support. Financial support that you never acknowledged or appreciated, I shot back. Financial support that you thought you were entitled to even after throwing me out of your lives. We're your parents. Family takes care of family. Family treats family with respect. Family doesn't scream at each other and then pretend it never happened. Grandma tried to regain control of the situation. Both of you need to calm down and focus on solutions. Polly, your parents made a mistake, but they're willing to apologize. Surely that's enough to restore the relationship and get back to normal. This is normal, Grandma. This is how Mom handles any conversation she doesn't like. She explodes, says terrible things, then expects everyone to pretend it never happened and go back to business as usual. That's not true, Mom protested. Really? When was the last time you actually apologized for anything? Not a non-apology, like I'm sorry you were upset, or I'm sorry if my words were hurtful. But an actual acknowledgement of wrongdoing and request for forgiveness. The question hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the truth. In 30 years of family gatherings, none of us had ever heard Sharon Patterson admit genuine fault for anything. Uncle Dave finally broke the uncomfortable silence. Sharon, I think we need to talk about the bigger picture here. Polly's been carrying most of your expenses for 2 years while the rest of us have been covering smaller bills. Maybe it's time we all stopped enabling this situation and forced you and Robert to live within your actual means. Enabling. Mom's voice rose dangerously. We're not drug addicts, Dave. We're a family going through a rough patch. A 2-year rough patch that shows no signs of improvement, he replied firmly. Robert, when was the last time you actively looked for full-time work? Dad shifted uncomfortably under his brother's direct gaze. The construction industry is slow right now. For 2 years straight. I'm doing what I can. Are you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you've been coasting on your daughter's sacrifice while pretending everything is fine. The intervention was turning against my parents, and Mom could sense the shift in the room's energy. Her next move was predictably desperate. Fine, you all want to gang up on us and act like we're terrible people, go ahead. But don't expect us to grovel for forgiveness when we're the ones facing homelessness. Polly made her choice when she decided money was more important than family. The projection was stunning in its audacity. Even facing the loss of their home, she was still trying to make herself the victim and me the villain. I stood up, slowly gathering my purse and the printed bank statements I'd never needed to use. You're right, Mom. I did make a choice. I chose to stop enabling your financial irresponsibility and emotional abuse. I chose to start living my own life instead of sacrificing everything for parents who couldn't even say thank you. So you're really going to let us lose our home? I'm going to let you handle your own responsibilities like the adults you claim to be. Please, Polly, Dad finally spoke up. We can work this out. We can go to counseling, establish better communication. Just don't let this destroy our family. For a moment, his genuine distress almost weakened my resolve. This was the father who'd taught me to ride a bicycle and helped with math homework. But then I remembered all the silent dinners where he'd watched Mom tear me down without saying a word. Dad, if you want to save this family, start by getting a full-time job and setting boundaries with your wife's temper. Stop expecting other people to fix problems you're capable of solving yourselves. I headed toward the front door, but Mom's parting shot followed me. Don't come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away. Family is forever, but you're choosing to be alone. Actually, I turned back one final time, I'm choosing to be free. The door closed behind me with a finality that felt like the end of one life and the beginning of another. The aftermath of the family meeting brought an unexpected period of clarity. For 3 days, my phone remained blissfully silent while I processed what had happened in Grandma's living room. Then on Tuesday evening, Uncle Dave called with news that would force the final confrontation. Polly, I wanted you to hear this from me first. Your parents have been calling everyone in the family asking for money, not just the $5,000 for the mortgage catch-up, but ongoing monthly support to replace what you were providing. How is that going for them? Not well. After hearing that recording and seeing how they handled the intervention, most people are backing away. Aunt Linda told them she can't afford to increase her contributions. Cousin Michael flat out refused to get more involved. Even Grandma is having second thoughts about enabling this situation. What about you? I told them I'd cover 1 more month of car insurance, but after that, they need to figure it out themselves. 43-year-old men shouldn't be dependent on family charity to keep their lights on. The conversation confirmed what I'd suspected would happen. My parents had burned through most of their family goodwill with their manipulative behavior and refusal to take responsibility. They were running out of people to bail them out. That night, I made a decision that had been building for weeks. I called a lawyer. The consultation was eye-opening. Attorney Jennifer Walsh specialized in family financial disputes and elder law, and she listened carefully as I explained the situation. Ms. Patterson, you were smart to document your financial contributions and the circumstances under which you stopped providing them. What you've described could potentially be considered financial elder abuse if your parents ever claimed you were controlling or manipulating their finances. Even though they're only in their late 50s, age isn't the only factor. If they tried to argue that you created a dependency relationship and then withdrew support to coerce certain behaviors, they might have grounds for a complaint. The fact that you have recordings of their verbal abuse and documented evidence of their own demands for you to leave helps your case significantly. So what should I do? Protect yourself by maintaining clear boundaries and documenting any future interactions. If they continue to harass you or try to involve other family members in pressuring you, we may need to consider a cease and desist letter or even a restraining order. The legal consultation cost $300 money I could now afford because I wasn't supporting 2 households. It also gave me the confidence to make one final attempt at setting clear boundaries with my parents. I drafted a letter that took me 4 tries to get right. It was businesslike, but not cruel, firm, but not vindictive. I printed it out on good paper and mailed it to their house with delivery confirmation. The letter arrived on Thursday. By Friday evening, my phone was ringing with Dad's number on the display. Polly, we got your letter. We need to talk. Everything I needed to say was in that letter. Please just hear me out. We've been doing a lot of thinking since the family meeting. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Columbus, that was roughly halfway between our locations. I arrived early and chose a table near the window where I could see them coming. They walked in together looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen them. Dad's shoulders were permanently hunched now, and Mom's face showed the stress of the past month. They ordered coffee and settled across from me with nervous energy. First, Dad began, "We want to thank you for agreeing to meet with us. And we want to apologize," Mom added, though her tone suggested the words were difficult to get out. "I said things I shouldn't have said, and I'm sorry you were hurt by them." It was the classic non-apology expressing regret for my feelings rather than acknowledging wrongdoing. But it was also more than she'd ever offered before. "What are you apologizing for specifically?" I asked. "For losing my temper and saying hurtful things during our argument." "What hurtful things?" She squirmed in her chair, clearly hoping to avoid repeating her harsh words. "I told you to leave, and I shouldn't have done that." "What else?" "I said some things about you being selfish, which wasn't fair." And the extraction process was painful, but eventually I got her to acknowledge most of what she'd said, though she still couldn't bring herself to repeat the most venomous parts. "Okay, I accept your apology for losing your temper. Now what are you going to do differently going forward?" They looked at each other uncertainly, clearly not having thought past the apology phase. "We want to rebuild our relationship," Dad said. "How?" "Well, we'd like you to start coming to Sunday dinners again. And we'll try to communicate better when we have disagreements." "That's it. You want to go back to exactly the way things were, except with better communication." "What else do you want from us?" Mom asked, a hint of her old defensiveness creeping back in. I pulled out a folder I'd brought with me containing copies of bank statements, payment records, and a detailed breakdown of everything I'd contributed to their household over the past 2 years. "I want you to acknowledge reality. This is documentation of $43,000 I've given you since Dad's business failed. $43,000 that I earned through overtime and sacrifice while living in conditions that were barely above poverty level." They stared at the papers as if seeing them for the first time, which in a sense they were. Neither had ever bothered to track where their mortgage payments were actually coming from. "We didn't know the amount was so high," Dad whispered. "You didn't want to know. You were perfectly happy accepting the help as long as you could pretend it wasn't really happening." "We're grateful," Mom said stiffly. "No, you're not. Grateful people say thank you. Grateful people don't scream at their benefactors for suggesting practical solutions to financial problems." "So what do you want from us?" Dad asked again. I pulled out another document, this one printed on legal letterhead. "I want you to read this." It was the letter from my attorney explaining the legal vulnerabilities I faced by providing long-term financial support to family members who might later claim financial abuse. It recommended that all future support, if any, be provided through formal agreements with clear terms and documentation. "You consulted a lawyer!" Mom's voice rose in indignation. "I consulted a lawyer because your behavior at the family meeting made it clear that you're willing to rewrite history and blame me for problems you created. I need to protect myself from future allegations." "We would never take legal action against you," Dad protested. 2 months ago, I would have said you'd never throw me out of the house either. But here we are." I leaned forward across the small table, making sure I had their full attention. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get full-time jobs and learn to live within your means. You're going to stop asking family members for money and start taking responsibility for your own choices. And if you want any kind of relationship with me going forward, you're going to go to counseling to learn how to communicate without verbal abuse." "And if we do all that," Mom asked, "then maybe we can rebuild some kind of relationship. But it will be a relationship between equals, not between a parent who demands sacrifice and a child who provides it without question." "What about the house?" "What about it?" "Are you going to help us save it?" I looked at these two people who had raised me, loved me in their imperfect way, and ultimately failed me when I needed them most. The little girl inside me wanted to rescue them one more time to write the check that would solve their immediate crisis and restore the illusion of family harmony. But the adult I'd become understood that rescuing them again would only delay the reckoning they needed to have with reality. No, I'm not going to save the house. You're going to lose it, and then you're going to find somewhere you can actually afford to live. Maybe that will teach you the value of living within your means. Mom's face crumpled, and for a moment I saw genuine grief for the life they were about to lose. But even in that moment of vulnerability, she couldn't resist one final manipulation. I hope you can live with yourself watching your parents become homeless while you live in your nice apartment. You won't be homeless. You'll be living somewhere that matches your actual income instead of somewhere you can only afford through other people's charity. I stood up, leaving the documents on the table for them to keep. When you're ready to have an honest relationship based on mutual respect, call me. Until then, figure out your own problems like the adults you claim to be. Walking out of that coffee shop felt like crossing a bridge that immediately burned behind me. There would be no going back to the old dynamic, no matter what consequences followed. 6 months later, I was standing on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunrise paint the October sky in shades of gold and pink. My coffee was still steaming in the crisp morning air, and I had nowhere to be until my therapy appointment that afternoon. For the first time in my adult life, Saturday mornings belonged entirely to me. The transformation had been remarkable. My savings account, freed from the constant drain of supporting 2 households, had grown to levels I'd never imagined possible. I'd been promoted to senior analyst at work, an advancement that came with both increased responsibility and a significant salary bump. Most importantly, I'd learned to recognize my own worth beyond my utility as a financial resource. My parents had indeed lost the house. The foreclosure process took 3 months, during which they frantically searched for family members willing to provide emergency funding. But the intervention meeting had damaged their credibility too severely. Uncle Dave stopped paying their car insurance as promised. Aunt Linda declined to increase her contributions. Cousin Michael refused all requests for assistance. Even Grandma Patterson, after much prayer and reflection, decided that enabling their dependency wasn't truly helpful. They now lived in a small 2-bedroom rental house across town that cost $800 a month, an amount they could actually afford on their combined income once Dad finally accepted a full-time position at a home improvement store. The job paid $17 an hour with benefits, which represented steady income for the first time since his construction business failed. Mom had increased her retail hours and was working nearly full-time at 35 hours per week. Together, they earned enough to cover their rent, utilities, food, and transportation, without requiring charity from relatives. The adjustment had been difficult, but they were learning to live within their means. The health effects had been noticeable too. Dad looked less stressed now that he had structured employment and wasn't constantly worrying about money he couldn't control. Mom had lost the frantic edge that came from maintaining an unsustainable lifestyle through manipulation and denial. Our relationship remained limited but was slowly improving. 3 months after losing the house, Dad had called to apologize more completely than he'd ever managed before. He acknowledged his failure to protect me from Mom's verbal abuse and his role in enabling their financial dependence. He'd started individual therapy and was working to understand his patterns of passive avoidance. Mom's journey had been more difficult. The loss of their home had forced her to confront realities she'd spent years avoiding. She'd initially blamed everyone else for their situation, including me, the extended family, and various economic forces beyond their control. But as the months passed and she experienced the satisfaction of paying her own bills with her own earnings, something had begun to shift. 2 weeks earlier, I'd received a handwritten letter that represented the first genuine apology she'd ever offered. She acknowledged the verbal abuse, the financial manipulation of family members, and her role in creating the crisis that destroyed their stability. She asked for forgiveness but didn't demand immediate reconciliation, recognizing that trust would need to be rebuilt slowly. I'd agreed to limited contact with careful boundaries. We met for coffee once a month in neutral locations, conversations that focused on their progress toward independence rather than attempts to restore the old dynamic. Dad and I had slightly more contact, meeting for lunch occasionally to discuss his therapy insights and his efforts to build a healthier marriage. The extended family relationships had stabilized as well. Uncle Dave and I had grown closer through the process, bonding over our shared recognition of enabling behaviors and our commitment to healthier boundaries. Aunt Linda had initially been cool toward me, believing I'd been too harsh with my parents. But watching their successful adjustment to independent living had gradually changed her perspective. Grandma Patterson had been the most challenging relationship to navigate. She'd struggled with the concept of tough love and had initially seen my actions as abandonment rather than boundary setting. But she'd also lived long enough to recognize patterns of family dysfunction, and she eventually admitted that my parents' forced independence had produced better results than decades of rescue attempts. My own healing had been profound. Weekly therapy sessions had helped me recognize the emotional abuse I'd endured and the codependent patterns I'd developed in response. I was learning to identify manipulation tactics and respond with confidence rather than guilt. Most importantly, I was discovering who I was beyond my role as the family rescuer. I'd started dating for the first time in years, something that had been impossible when every spare dollar and moment of energy went towards supporting my parents. I joined a hiking club and discovered a passion for outdoor photography. My apartment had become a real home decorated with things I loved rather than whatever I could afford after paying everyone else's bills. The financial freedom was intoxicating. I'd opened a retirement account and was contributing the maximum amount allowed. I'd started a vacation fund and was planning a trip to Ireland the following spring. I'd even bought a car that was only 3 years old instead of the ancient vehicles I'd been driving to keep expenses low. But the most meaningful change was internal. I no longer felt responsible for other people's emotions or financial security. I'd learned to distinguish between genuine emergencies and artificial crises created by poor planning. I could offer support when appropriate without sacrificing my own stability or future. My phone rang, interrupting my peaceful morning reflection. Dad's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with only a slight tightening in my chest. "Good morning, Polly." "Hi, Dad. How are you doing?" "Really well, actually. I wanted to call and share some news. Your mother and I just signed up for a financial planning class at the community college. We're learning how to budget properly and save for emergencies." "That's wonderful, Dad. I'm proud of you for taking that step." "It feels good to be learning these things. I wish we'd done it years ago, but better late than never." "How's Mom handling the class?" "She's actually really into it. Turns out she's got a head for numbers when she's not panicked about money all the time. The instructor says she asks great questions." We talked for a few more minutes about his work at the home improvement store and their plans to start a small emergency fund. The conversation was comfortable and genuine, lacking the undercurrent of desperation that had characterized our interactions for years. After he hung up, I realized how much our relationship had improved once the financial pressure was removed. We could simply be father and daughter again without the complicated dynamics of dependence and resentment. The therapy appointment that afternoon was particularly productive. Dr. Martinez and I discussed my progress in developing healthy boundaries and my growing comfort with disappointing people when necessary. "How do you feel about your parents' situation now?" she asked during our session. "I feel proud of them, actually. They're doing things I never thought they were capable of, and they're discovering strengths they didn't know they had. Losing the house was the best thing that could have happened to them." "And how do you feel about your role in that loss?" "I feel like I did the loving thing even though it didn't feel loving at the time. Sometimes the kindest gift you can give someone is letting them face the consequences of their choices." "What would you tell someone else who's in a similar situation with family members?" "I'd tell them that being family doesn't mean accepting abuse or enabling self-destructive behavior. I'd tell them that real love sometimes requires saying no, even when it causes short-term pain. And I'd tell them that their own life and future matter just as much as anyone else's." That evening, I hosted my first Thanksgiving dinner in my apartment. The guest list was small but meaningful: Uncle Dave and his wife, Aunt Linda, and cousin Michael. We decided to establish new holiday traditions that weren't centered around my parents' drama or financial needs. The dinner was relaxed and joyful, filled with genuine conversation and laughter. Uncle Dave helped with the turkey, Aunt Linda brought her famous green bean casserole, and Cousin Michael surprised everyone with homemade pumpkin pie. For the first time in years, a family gathering felt like a celebration rather than an obligation. As we sat around my small dining table, I reflected on how much had changed in just 6 months. The little girl who had desperately wanted her parents' approval had evolved into a woman who valued her own peace more than other people's comfort. The young adult who had sacrificed everything for family harmony had learned to create healthy relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. My parents weren't ready for holiday gatherings yet, but they were working toward that goal in their own therapy. Someday we might share holidays again, but it would be as equals contributing to a celebration rather than as a rescuer and the rescued. The evening ended with everyone helping to clean up, and Uncle Dave pulled me aside as he prepared to leave. "Polly, I want you to know how proud I am of what you've done. It took courage to set those boundaries and look at the results. Your parents are healthier, the family dynamics are better, and you're thriving. You did the right thing." It didn't feel right at the time. The hardest decisions rarely do, but sometimes doing the loving thing means being willing to be seen as the villain temporarily. As I cleaned up the last of the dinner dishes, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been an exhausted woman living in poverty to support parents who took my sacrifice for granted. Tonight I was surrounded by the remnants of a joyful celebration in my own beautiful home, financially secure and emotionally healthy. The phone call that had started this transformation, Dad's panicked demand about the mortgage payments, had felt like the end of the world at the time. But it had actually been the beginning of a new world, one where I was the author of my own story, rather than a supporting character in someone else's drama. I looked around my apartment, taking in the framed photographs from my hiking adventures, the bookshelf filled with novels I'd finally had time to read, and the comfortable furniture I'd chosen because I loved it, rather than because it was all I could afford. This space represented more than just better living conditions. It represented the life I'd built through setting healthy boundaries and refusing to accept unacceptable treatment. The lesson had been painful, but transformative. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people experience the natural consequences of their choices. When we constantly rescue others from their mistakes, we rob them of opportunities to grow and ourselves of the respect we deserve. True family love requires accountability, honesty, and mutual respect, not endless sacrifice from one member to support the poor choices of others. My parents were better people now than they'd been 6 months ago, stronger and more capable, because they'd been forced to develop those strengths. Our relationship was healthier because it was based on choice rather than obligation. The extended family had learned to set better boundaries and share responsibility more equitably. Everyone had benefited from my decision to stop enabling their dysfunction, even though it had initially felt cruel and selfish. Sometimes walking away is the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved. As I turned off the lights and headed toward my bedroom, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the difficult journey that had led me to this peaceful moment. I'd learned to value myself enough to demand better treatment, and in doing so, I'd created space for everyone around me to become better versions of themselves. The scared young woman who had answered her father's angry phone call 6 months ago could never have imagined this outcome. But the confident woman preparing for bed in her own beautiful space understood that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our loved ones is the opportunity to stand on their own 2 feet. Before I share my final thoughts, I want to ask you something. Have you ever found yourself constantly rescuing family members or friends from the consequences of their poor choices? How did it affect your own life and dreams? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more real-life stories about setting boundaries and building healthier relationships. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. They might need to hear that it's okay to put their own well-being first. Thank you for listening to my journey and for being part of this community. I hope my experience helps you find the courage to create the life you deserve, even when it means disappointing people who expect you to sacrifice everything for their comfort. Remember, you can't pour from an empty cup, and you deserve relationships built on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.